Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Collateral Global Podcast, where we explore the legacy of the COVID-19 pandemic on science, society, and public health policy. I have with me today my guest, Piero Stanig, who's professor of political science at Bocconi University in Milan, Italy, and visiting associate professor at NUS in Singapore. He's the author, along with Gianmarco Daniele, of Fallimento Lockdown, or Lockdown Failure, which was published at the end of 2021 in Italian. So thank you so much, Piero, for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Definitely a pleasure.
So now there's a subtitle to the book, right? And it's in Italian, so I'm not going to try my Italian pronunciation. But if you could let us know what the subtitle is and sort of what the meaning behind that choice was.
Well, the subtitle, I have to tell you, comes from negotiation between the authors and the publisher. So it's not necessarily something I totally endorse, but the idea is how a politics without ideas deprived us of freedom without protecting us from the virus. In some way, it reflects the spirit of the book. The book is a book about policies, not a book about the pandemic. It's a book about lockdowns. And it's mostly centering about, this intuition that the politics that were in place at the moment were without ideas in the sense that they were clueless. So the literal translation is politica senza idee, means politics without ideas, but let's say clueless politics.
Okay.
And ultimately, what happened is, in our view, the view that we put down in the book, is that a lot of things were done just for the sake of being able to say we are taking care of the problem, but without thinking rationally about what the problem actually was and what the possibly best responses to those problems would be. And that's basically the intuition of the book, if you want. That's how the subtitle reflects the content.
Okay, great. Sense? Yeah, no, that's good. And so, I mean, Italy played an important role in the global domino effect of lockdown, right? So when you're saying that this was a policy of doing a lot, but just sort of grasping at straws, how do you see Italy comparing to other countries in that regard?
Well, I mean, we moved first, and I don't know exactly why, maybe because the first cases that started being visible took place in Italy. It's also the case that the government was in place in Italy in that specific moment was in itself a bit strange. So certain strange things happened around the time. The Minister of Health published a book that never appeared on bookshelves, in bookstores. But you could buy it actually from Amazon abroad. So I bought it from Amazon Spain, like a lot of people did, because Amazon Spain had a bunch of copies as foreign books. And what emerges there is you have a minister that feels extremely scared of a situation that was unpredictable. They didn't trust their own pandemic plan, mostly because, as the Italian government often does, they submitted a pandemic plan that was completely perfunctory. And so they said, we can't use this because we know that we didn't do it. We didn't prepare it pretty well. What the minister tells you, we have no roadmap. We have absolutely no idea how to take care of this. And a lot of noise starts taking place. And the national lockdown emerges pretty much out of panic. So what happens is that initially some areas that were hit more clearly by COVID in northern Italy were turned into red zones. So they had locally prescribed lockdowns. Now what happens is that a lot of people start thinking, oh my God, they are going to lock down Milan. There was not a lockdown at the moment. And what they do is, especially students that are officially resident in other towns but study in Milan, rush to the station, try to take a train
Right.
to get out of the city and go back to the south, mostly.
Yeah. Yeah.
The minister sees on TV the scenes, the station is completely chaotic, and he says, okay, we have to stop people from moving from Lombardy to the rest of the country, especially because Lombardy has a civilized, modern, efficient healthcare system, but other areas of the country have more problems. So they said, okay, if this spreads very fast to other areas of the country, then it's going to be a problem. And so what they do is they say, okay, we're going to lock down the entire country, mostly to remove the incentives that people had.
Right.
For moving from Milan to elsewhere, because they say, and he says explicitly in the book, we can't make certain parts of the country more livable than others, because otherwise people would flee to those. And so we're going to make life unbearable everywhere, so everybody is going to stay put where they are. And so this is how the national lockdown came into existence. Now, importantly, the national lockdown resembles a little bit what was happening in Wuhan, right?
Right. I mean, you would say
Wuhan, from the point of view of policy analysis, the policy was very different. There was a policy to prevent people and basically to prevent the epidemic from moving from where it started to other areas of the country. And so basically they say you can't get out of here. Now, this type of policies were in the pandemic plans that were prepared before 2020. And so the idea, it was conceivable that, okay, if an epidemic is concentrated, circumscribed to a specific geographic region, you can't tell people you can't leave this region, right? The idea of a national lockdown that you basically put in place before you have infections, communitarian infections elsewhere, is a complete innovation in terms of policy. This was not something that had been considered other than with Ebola in West Africa for 3 days. Right. And so this was completely new. People thought this would last a few days. In Italy, they didn't even talk about this 2 weeks to stop the spread. People were singing on balconies. There was this big party and people playing violin on balconies, as if this was something that would last 3 days, right? And I remember saying, you know, like, this thing is not going to be over until the summer. People would look at me like, oh, you were the usual crazy, cynical pessimist and
political scientist, right?
And then ultimately, that's what happened, right? We were physically, and in some regions like where I was, were physically under house arrest in the sense that you couldn't get out other than specific reasons, with a sworn affidavit that you had to give to the police when they stopped you on the supermarket. And they would actually check if you did the promise in the affidavit, which is even more complicated to think of in legal terms, because you're pre-committed to go to the supermarket. What if I change my mind? Right?
Absolutely. So a couple of interesting things there. One is it's good to be reminded, because we often think of Wuhan and China as the originator of the policy model. But what you're telling us, Italy was the first country that had a national lockdown. So actually, national lockdown was an Italian invention, we could say, right? I'm curious about this book that you mentioned. So the health minister, is this the same health minister that he is often heckled in the streets now because of the vaccine mandates that he implemented? So he wrote a book and it was never released in Italy. Is that what happened?
He wrote a book with the idea, it was Why We'll Be Healthy Again. No? And it was written in the summer of 2020 with the idea that ultimately by the time we come out in the fall of 2020, the pandemic was over. And when infections started going up, we basically said, oh, it's not a good idea to have it released. But the book had already been shipped to Amazon. So that's why people bought it. Now those copies, by the way, sell for huge amounts. One of the best investments I made is like 700. But crucially, now he finally published it, but it's a revised version. It came out a few months ago. So yes, that's the minister. He's the great architect behind all this. At least from the point of view of the health policy. Then when it comes to the civil rights policy, the real architect is the former prime minister that paradoxically is a lawyer.
Right.
And so he should know better that most of the things he was doing were legally highly questionable. And from the point of institutional analysis, really, really bizarre.
So there's a lot of pandemic books that were written in 2020 or 2021, right? And there's a benefit to that, like you're saying, you get to see the action up front, or the way people were thinking about the events as they were unfolding, right? A lot of these books, though, they don't have the benefit of hindsight. So your book was written in 2021, right? So if you were to go back and sort of reconstruct that book, is there any particular things that you would change, or do you feel like your conclusions have been strengthened over time?
But I think that ultimately, the book was very moderate and in some way very generous also towards the politicians and in general, the opinion makers that pushed for lockdowns. And I don't regret this. I was attacked, obviously, by the lockdown enthusiasts for being against lockdowns, but also by the flat Earth kind of conspiracy theorists for being too generous regarding what happened. So I honestly think that, if anything, what is happening now is that ideas that were considered bizarre are now vindicated, because it's becoming mainstream to say that, for instance, closing schools was a terrible idea, right? We said it very explicitly, and there was very little literature about school closures at the time. Because there hadn't been many school closures. And so I found two that I cited there. One is about World War II in the Netherlands. And one is about segregation in the US, where some governors, rather than having Black kids go to school, simply shut down the schools. And these were the two papers that studied in a well-identified way what are the consequences of long school closures on cognitive ability. There was nothing. Now there are a lot of papers, and they all show that there is a decline in abilities, there's a decline in knowledge, there's a decline in mental health. We didn't have any evidence there because nobody has studied it yet. So honestly, I don't think I would have written the book any differently. If I have to be honest. I write very little, but usually when I write something, I want to be something that I want to believe in the long run. There are people publish 10 papers a year, and then most of those are false. Maybe I publish one, but is I trying to make sure
So getting back to your comment about your sort of societal narratives changing, right? So has the general public shifted their position on lockdown? Vaccine mandates were a big issue in Italy, right? What's the public sentiment?
But I think it shifted a little bit. Honestly, I haven't seen any data. We ran a survey before publishing the book. And that survey at the time seemed to be pretty discouraging, in the sense that, among other things, a supermajority of the Italian public believed that the reason why the policies were ineffective is because the citizenry was not obedient enough. Okay. Now, I think this changed a little bit, but I don't have the data to tell you how much it changed. I have been gone from Italy since 2022, so I also stopped caring to some extent, or I just want to forget a very dark period in our lives. For sure, there was also in the public opinion data that we collected a crazy technocratic sentiment that, basically, again, supermajorities of the population, and in particular older voters, said that democracy should basically be put in the back burner, and ruled by experts is what is important. I think that this is changing quite a bit. I don't know how much it's changing. One observation that I wish I had made in the book more explicitly is that if you think about the late 2010s, that's the moment when experts have the lowest public reputation possible, right? Think about Brexit. Nobody was believing in experts at all. I say, oh, you're an expert, so I don't believe you. And suddenly, with the pandemic, experts, even if slightly different experts than the ones before, so no longer, say, economists, but public health experts and these virologists became public celebrities, and in some way, they were considered superior to democratically elected decision makers.
Yeah.
I think this has changed a little bit, but I have no idea how much.
Okay.
It's very hard. I could tell you maybe on Twitter things have changed a little bit, but Twitter is not public opinion.
Yeah, no, it is exactly. And so, I mean, I guess one way to measure that the public sentiment is to look at how this public inquiry, which is due to get off the ground. I'm not sure exactly when, but it's been announced by the government. Can you give us a sense of what's going on in Italy with public inquiry and sort of evaluations of COVID?
I honestly have very few hopes regarding what's going to happen.
Okay.
I haven't even followed this. Now the problem is that I'm pretty sure the type of response that will be given, and I can kind of predict this by thinking about the responses that political elites or policymakers gave elsewhere, is, well, we didn't know any better. So yeah, we're sorry, but this was the best we could do. Now, the truth is that my stance, and something that what we also said in the book, is that there should be a public recognition that these policies were wrong. Ex ante. You didn't have to wait until 2024 to then say, well, actually, we did a lot that was useless.
Right.
I don't think that there's going to be an actual reckoning of what went wrong, especially because people like myself were saying what we're doing is absurd. And I was saying this since March 2020 on my very small Twitter account. I'm not a celebrity, I'm not an opinion maker. There were people, and also some people with a bit more visibility, for instance, in Twitter, and our colleagues in the social sciences with more visibility, they were saying this since March or April 2020. And ultimately, these critiques were completely ignored. So you can't tell me now, oh, well, we didn't know any better, because there were people who were telling you, maybe, these policies at a minimum are going to be extremely costly. Policies that cost that percentage of GDP, like anything, is better than a policy that is going to cost. And so you can say, oh, it's very costly to, say, deliver stuff, groceries, to anybody over 65. Oh, well, it's extremely expensive. Yeah, and shutting down the economy for a year is going to cost a tenth of GDP of the country. You can't tell me that this is not costly, right?
Yes.
So I think what's going to happen ultimately is something like that. In any case, no parliamentary inquiry committee in Italy never concluded anything about
that the government got it wrong, right? You can give the government a C- or F on its report card. I mean, there are ways to do these evaluations that are not. It doesn't descend into a blame game, which obviously is slightly difficult with the sort of power dynamics right now in the Italian parliament, right, with the political parties. One way is for the public health establishment itself to be evaluated independently, right? So the independence of the evaluation is often really critical. The thing with these public inquiries, as we found out in the UK, is that independence doesn't mean that you're going to have a critical eye and actually look at the policies themselves. First of all, consider the evidence, and then second of all, actually seriously evaluate whether the policies were effective and sort of how they went wrong, right? So it seems like we'll have to. I guess we'll have to wait and see how the inquiry proceeds in Italy, right? And sort of.
I can tell you, I haven't been following this, so I I don't know. What I can say is one thing, that I do not believe that the public health elites are going to necessarily admit any wrongdoing.
Right.
Even if, now, paradoxically, now Italy has a statutory body that advises the Ministry of Health. It's called the High Commission of Health.
Yeah.
This was bypassed by another technical scientific committee that was set up on purpose, right? And so there might be some rivalries there within the public health elites, because some people that would have had the authority to make policy or advise policy were completely biased, and in a semi-legal way, if you want.
That's a really good point. Well, thanks so much, Piero, for joining us. So Piero Stanig, he's the author of Fallimento Lockdown, an Italian book published at the end of 2021. Thanks so much, Piero.
You're welcome.